herself and asked if I would answer a question that troubled her. Her question was as to what was the significance of the Mauryan emperor Ashoka using different languages for his edicts and within Prakrit variant regional forms. I recognized in an instant that she did not conform to being what was the usual teacher at university level, but was a scholar familiar with the sources which she was studying from different perspectives. I met her for lunch the next day so that we could, at leisure, discuss her questions on my lecture. The lunch was a delight. Champak sparkled in her scholarship, which at that time was bound up in the history of South India and in artifacts such as sculpture in particular, as well as whatever could be garnered from temple architecture of the same area. Much of the detail was new to me, so it was a pleasure to be discussing it with a knowledgeable person. What was so impressive was that not only was she familiar with the places, but also with the artifacts. Inevitably, we discussed why the two, the object and the location, were linked. I gradually imbibed knowledge about the South Indian past. Visiting historical sites with her, as we did on many occasions, was an unforgettable experience. She knew equally well the nuances of both the textual sources through her study of Tamil and Sanskrit, as well as art historical data. Her interpretations of what she saw were based on deep knowledge. I learned much from her, and she opened up many new perspectives on South Indian history, which we both enjoyed exploring. From our first conversations, we, as they say, hit it off and never stopped exchanging possible ideas. She was warm and friendly when expressing her views and firm in holding to them. She was not carping or being sarcastic about the opinions of others, and we soon became close friends. A couple of other institutions, such as the Madras Christian College in Tambaram, asked me to give lectures, and this took me to Chennai. It soon became routine that I would go one day earlier, which day was kept for spending with Champak. This routine continued with every visit to Chennai when she was still in Chennai. I simply would not give up on Champaka's company and her hospitality. It was the same indulgence when I visited her home, where her sister, the numismatist Vanaja, then working in the National Museum, was also resident. So when we started the Center for Historical Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University, we decided that South Indian history from the earliest beginnings must have full space, much more than is generally given in most universities. So who would we find to take charge of this? It was Champaka, who was declared as the obvious and outstanding choice for a specialist in South Indian history, in order to build a specialization in that history at our center. Her contribution to the intellectual formation of the center as a whole was equally enormous and was to benefit all of us, faculty and students. The most remarkable aspect of her coming to JNU was for us to witness both the expansion and the diversity of her intellectual interest in aspects of South Indian history, and how effectively she located South Indian history in the wider context of the history of the subcontinent. This was new and challenging to many historians who tended to study South Indian history as a kind of separate entity, ranging from archaeological sources to how data moves into periods with written sources. These used to be treated as two distinct bodies of evidence, with little attention given to links in the two sources, in terms of the artifacts that were also described in written sources. But this began to change with the work of people like Champaka and her students. A small example of this combination, as it were, of archaeological and textual evidence are the sherds of amphorae carrying wine as part of the Indo-Roman trade. And then the appreciation in Shangam texts of the wine brought by the Yavanas. The study of South Indian history had earlier focused on dynasties and the activities of rulers, or on the building of temples regarded as the most important structures. But now there was an added dimension, the study of institutions of governance, of social relations, and of economic concerns. This is closer to what constitutes the history of people and their daily lives. Temples began to be viewed as institutions of religious intent and supporting the economy of the kingdom and social practices. Had there not been wealthy donors, then wealthy temples could not have been built. Therefore, temples needed to be seen both as superb examples of local architecture and of art historical forms in their sculptures. But it should not be forgotten that the temples also had facets that controlled the social activity of the people who worshipped there. Champak and those that carried out the research that she highlighted not only pointed out the evolution of these institutions, but also that it gave rise to the form of new religious sects and social and economic organizations. While, for example, did resources originally controlled by individual members of society get organized into a system of control by guilds, some of those of the peninsula being the most powerful in the medieval period of the subcontinent. Such changes also affected notions of the state and governance, as reflected in Champak's analysis of the Chola state. Her critique of Bertenstein's treatment of South India as a medieval society was deeply impressive and reflected the new ideas now entering the histories of South India. Links with different histories in various parts of India were recognized. Inevitably, the emphasis on regional studies that this required gave us a far better analysis of the patterns of medieval states than what had been known before. These analyses brought the history of the peninsula into the context of medieval India in a broader sense, a context that was beginning to hesitantly develop with the discovery of connections between the regions or with the comparative study of differences. The region came into its own, as did the environment and subregions. Trade was a major factor in building and establishing the economic connections, which, in a sense, was symbolic of other connections. One of these were migrations from north to south in the subcontinent, and also from areas across the seas when Indian traders hosted settlements of traders from West Asia, as indeed they had been doing for a millennium before, resulting in a variety of cultural admixtures. Champaka and her students were providing a new dimension to these studies. Indian traders going east to Southeast Asia had a strong backing, not only from South Indian traders, but also from the guilds, as indeed the ruling dynasties. This trade was one of the factors that helped keeping them politically in power. Champaka was outspoken in her views on subjects and in general. The opinions she expressed were cogent and firm, backed by strong arguments. But she wasn't rigid. If she could be convinced otherwise by rational arguments, she would allow herself some change of view. The firmness was eminently sensible. She was immensely popular among students, and this was because she was always ready to clarify her historical explanations and make sure that they were correctly understood. Post-tutorial explanations, after the tutorial had been held, consisted of sessions of coffee at her house. Sometimes, especially for her colleagues, it was not just coffee, but a delicious meal as well. As we both grew older, and after we retired, we would often reminisce about the past and remember all the many occasions when we enjoyed what we were doing. I would like to remember her in such moments when she not only clarified the knots of history, but was also an exceptional person. Thank you.